At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the French monarchy was restored, but at the Congress of Vienna, the great powers had created a constitution for France in order to prevent another revolution. And Louis XVIII ruled according to this constitution, known as La Charte. During his rule, which lasted until 1824, all laws were passed through the new parliamentary bodies, the Chamber of Deputies and the Chamber of Peers. The Chamber of Deputies was made up of members elected by tax-paying citizens, and in this period there were two major parties, the Bourbon-supporting ultra-royalists and the more liberal doctrinals. However, when Louis's brother Charles X became king, he began to move against the new freedoms given to the people. For instance, in just a couple of months, he passed the Anti-Sacrilege Act, executing any blasphemers, and he paid indemnities to those who had had their property confiscated during the Revolution. Although the latter would have stabilised the real estate market, these reforms worried the old Bonapartists and liberals. Then, in 1827, he tried to change the inheritance laws and bring back primogeniture, meaning only the oldest male son would inherit the family lands, thus preventing large estates from being divided up. And although it would have only affected the richest of French citizens, Parliament voted against it. Then soldiers within the National Guard shouted at the king during a review, and he responded by disbanding the entire force. So the king's popularity declined throughout the year, and so too did the ultra-royalist party. So whereas they won over 90% of the vote in 1824, they were defeated by the doctrinals led by Lafayette in the 1827 election. However, in order to undermine the liberals in the chamber, Charles made the ultra-royalist Prince Polignac Prime Minister in August 1829. This outraged opponents, like future President Adolphe Thiers, who helped found the national newspaper to speak against the king. But during this time the chamber did not meet, and Charles decided to hold another election, hoping he'd gain more supporters within Parliament. But when the chamber eventually met again in March 1830, they passed a motion of no confidence against Charles, known as the Address of 221. So he just suspended the chamber until the elections in July, and he hoped a successful military campaign would gain the support of the public. He sent a force to Algeria and began to censor publications that spoke against him, but the ultra-royalists lost even more seats in the July elections. Fearing he'd lost control of Parliament, he issued the July Ordinances, which included suspending the freedom of press, barring the middle class from running in elections, and dissolving the Chamber of Deputies. On the 26th of July, just after they were published, journalists met in the offices of the national newspaper and vowed to continue to write. Plus, the now disenfranchised business owners shut up shop in protest, putting thousands of workers on the street. Hostile crowds began to gather that night, and that evening they began throwing projectiles at soldiers. But the soldiers fired back at the crowds, encouraging even more people to join the riot. Throughout the night, pockets of protesters fought the soldiers, barricades were set up, and old members of the National Guard joined the riot. Auguste Mormont, who was in charge of the city's defences, had too few troops to guard the entire city, and some troops began to desert. So the next day, influential bankers, generals and politicians signed a petition, pressuring the king to withdraw the ordinances. Prince Polignac refused to meet with them, and later in the day advised Charles to continue to resist reform and quell the uprising. But no reinforcements were called into the capital, which allowed the revolutionaries to set up thousands of barricades and take over sections of the city. And the next afternoon the revolutionaries finally seized the Tuileries Palace, Louvre and Hôtel de Ville. This effectively ended the fighting, as most Bourbon supporters fled the city, and Charles finally accepted defeat. He abdicated the throne, leaving it to his grandson Henri, and tasked Louis-Philippe from the House of Orleans to proclaim him as king. But Louis-Philippe ignored this, and because he was known for his liberal policies, the Chamber of Deputies called for him to be king. So on the 9th of August he was made the constitutional king of France, beginning the July monarchy. And this successful revolution encouraged revolutionaries to rise up across Europe, including in Poland and in Belgium, where they successfully declared independence. As for Louis-Philippe, he still faced opposition from many Republicans and those loyal to the House of Bourbon, and 2 years later he had to crush the June Rebellion and was eventually forced out of power in 1848 when the Second Republic was declared.